Hello, welcome to this video. Thanks so much for tuning in and sharing in this now moment with myself and with one another. My intention for this video is the highest levels of love, light, union, and communion. This particular video is a continuation of a decoding of a writing that I had actually put together back in January, I believe, of this year, although I'm not 100% sure. Much of what I write about has to do with connecting into where I have access in my knowingness with my higher guidance team, is what I lovingly refer to them as. And I essentially am tapping in through a style of writing that allows me to map into the map of our reality. The more open that I allow myself to be, and the higher vibrationally I am in my field when I'm tuning into this field, is directly reflected back to me by what information I'm pulling through, if that makes sense. And I'm sharing this because this is relevant to a lot of people right now, is the guidance, my higher guidance team, my higher self, and the crew that we all have that are helping us, that we have access to, the ancestors, the ancient future ancestors, are always around because we are connected through this medium, plasma, if we want to call it that, aether of reality that is part of source from my perspective. So when we hold an open-hearted, open-minded frequency, it gives us the opportunity to know thyself from a different perspective, rather than the old perspective of limitation, judgment, belief only being in a box, so to speak. And so what I essentially do is pull through and reorganize different time frequencies, different informations, pieces of information, or nodes, if we could call it, that are held within the lattice work of the map. And I pull through and I extract those bits, BYTS, of information, and I form them in a geometric way, one might call it. And it becomes a signature, it becomes a font. And that font holds a frequency and a vibration. It's just like when you write something in Comic Sans versus Tahoma, or whatever the font is, it has a different frequency, it has a different vibration. One is more casual and another one is more rigid and businesslike. And so my guides talk with me in that way, in a font, rhyme, rhythm format. And what they continuously tell me is that's how our reality is constructed. It's through sound and geometry and form and frequency. We could call our entire reality looks like cymatics. And so I bring that through in my writing, and it basically allows me to connect into these different resources. And so in this particular writing, which is part 2, if you feel called to go back and follow my first writing, you can go to carryyvonne.com. The video has me wearing a black shirt with lightning bolts on it. I can't remember the date, but it would have been around October 16th through the 18th, 2022. But my point is that it changes based on my perspective. So the more I open my perspective, the more I get from the writing that I'm playing with. This talked in this particular sharing about us going through a birthing canal. And so I'll recap just briefly. I won't read the whole thing like I did in my previous video. But essentially what my guides were kind of showing is that we had been in a time loop, and we'd been kind of stuck in a particular pattern. And because we didn't realize, it's a little bit like the Truman Show, right? In the Truman Show, if you haven't watched that movie, I highly recommend it. He's living his life based on what he thinks life is. He thinks that that's as big as his reality goes because he's never gone past it. And what I was shown is just because he's in that bubble doesn't mean that that other reality doesn't exist on the outside. And then eventually, spoiler alert, if you haven't seen the movie, don't listen to this, but he goes and finds that there is more. So he could only make his decisions or learn information based on the size of that bubble that he lived in, based on his memories, based on his perspective, based on that experience. We could call that bubble of reality a medium that he could work with. So, for example, if we're only working from water, we're not necessarily combining it with fire, earth, air. It only holds that platonic solid of water. But when you actually, it's a combination of oxygen, air, and water molecules. But anyways, you get my point. I hope that was clear. Bottom line is, we're working with what we have in that particular field of physicality, time, gravity, our relationship with time, and our perspectives based on our experiences. So as our perspective broadens, so does our relationship with all of that. Therefore, so too does the medium in which we're working in, right? Much like an artist adds to the color schematic, it changes how much we can paint if we have more colors that are available to us. And essentially what I was shown is we couldn't cross streams before because it would have been difficult for some people, couldn't make the jump. And essentially, we needed to have certain experiences as a humanity, as a collective, in order to make this shift in a particular way. So that's it in a nutshell of what I spoke about in my last video. There was more, but talking about the fact that we birthed this new space on Earth and within our body. And I was also talking about the fact that a lot of things are coming up for us that we didn't realize were there. So there's a lot of things that have been buried in the earth that we have not necessarily been told about, but we know that they're there. We just don't know because it hasn't been brought to our attention or our awareness. And this is kind of part of what I'm writing about. And this has started to kind of come up and be unearthed. If you guys watch Gaia TV, there's a lot of great shows. Robert Edward Grant has a great one all around the pyramids. Plus, he's a polymath. So he talks about some of the things that I've written about that I don't understand from a mathematical perspective. He'll talk about it and I can then see what I wrote about and go, oh, that's what I was referring to. And I'm going to talk about that in just a minute too. So we're going to go in and I'm just going to read part of this. And again, you can go back and read it if you want. It talks about our relationship with time, so on and so forth. Play-Doh, Play-Doh, molding, colors, clay, building shapes, smell, senses. And we use this as an analogy, but because as a child, you played with Play-Doh and it would take on the shapes of your imagination. You would take colors that were available to you and you would form what you knew as a child in that form, coming through form as formation in formation. Yoking, you would use what you were capable of forming in from your imagination. And there were some things that you could not display or you would create and others would not understand your work and where it was coming from. This is a little bit of a reference to me specifically, but all of us as well, where it was coming from, or in this space of understanding. And in this space, there were waves in which the patterning did not reflect what it was that you were accessing. And so the shapes were expressed in your own way. It would be as if the higher realms and the higher learning and the higher senses were all needing to calibrate. And they could not calibrate in a particular linearization bandwidth that existence was centered in before. but now this existence has shifted. The existential existence, existence, play on words, existential awareness of oneself has expanded. And the awareness is not necessarily knowledge. It is a knowing from within that accesses the knowledge. Yes, the knowledge and information can trigger certain knowings from deep within the soul, solar plexus region, physical being around the sun, place and space, the gut feeling. But this deeper knowing is expanding. And I'm going to pause there and I'm going to go back in and share the screen. And essentially what I'm understanding here is play on words, Play-Doh. So I'll just pause for a second. So Play-Doh, Plato, which takes me directly into Platonic solids, molding, colors, clay, building shapes, smell, senses. And we use this as an analogy as a child that's a typo. As a child, you played with Play-Doh and it would take the shapes of your imagination. Now, you would take colors that were available to you and you would form what you knew as a child. In that form, coming through form as formation in formation. So this is all a play on words, obviously. You're going to take the colors from this Play-Doh, right? And essentially you're utilizing what you have access to. So if you only have red and blue, you can make different shapes out of red and blue, or you could maybe combine them and make purple. I don't know if that really works with Play-Doh, how that works, but we'll just use that as an example. And the form, you're in form in a skin suit, then you're bringing into form through the medium of Play-Doh, through the medium that is your body, through the medium that is connected to the imagination, and you are bringing that into form through your own form that all holds in formation, and it is always in the process of informing. We don't always stay a child. We then grow through adolescence, through adulthood, and we're continuously shifting and changing our form based on the information that we are connecting with at all times, that we are seeing, receiving, experiencing, and then we create from that information. And it's a continuous cycle. So this is all a play on words. Now, we're not just using the medium of Play-Doh to make something. We're utilizing and using all of our senses as we do it. We're putting our energy into it. Now, Play-Doh, Platonic solids, it just takes me into, he used what he had access to. Well, he had access to a lot. If you look up Plato, you can't look up Plato without looking up Socrates and Pythagoras and all of these other beings that he was connected to. But what I found interesting as well was, obviously the Platonic solids and all of the things that he was interested in. Plato talked about metaphysics. Metaphysics is the branch of philosophy that studies the fundamental nature of reality. And this is where my eyes were guided to when I looked at Plato. The first principles of being, identity and change. And this is essentially what the message is that I'm sharing. What we identify with and how we identify and how we are identifiable in the cosmos has changed. We no longer hold the same vibration. We're no longer the same human. Therefore, that which we are seen as changes and vice versa. The first principle of being space and time, causality, necessity, and possibility. So it talks about consciousness and the relationship between mind and matter. So he talks about geometry. Obviously, geometry is with arithmetic. And I love the word arithmetic, right? It's a measure of a rhythm of numbers. And it concerns the properties of space, shape, size, distance, and the position of the figures. Now, when I write for me, it is a rhythmic. It's a rhythm, and I'm tuning into a geometric pattern, okay, that taps me into places in our architecture of reality from one perspective. Also, places in points and spaces in time that hold pieces of information that are essentially relevant for my experience now. So that has shifted. We've advanced. Therefore, everything that we would have built, now we're building differently. We're using a different medium. We have more colors that are available to us, and our senses have changed and expanded for those of us that are allowing them to. Therefore, our realization about how we have to work with this Play-Doh and what we're essentially building changes. Yolking, and that's also a play on words, not just yolk, it's the yolk of an egg, okay? Because I was talking about birthing in my previous video, which you, again, are more than welcome to go back to. But the previous video, yolking, so it's like the egg, but also bringing something together, yolking, pouring into that. You would use what you were capable of forming in. So from inside this egg, this is what I'm able to form. Just like, did I talk about the Truman Show? I accidentally recorded a video and wasn't mic'd. So basically it was on mute. But essentially what we were capable of forming in, you know, you can only create so much when you're in a child's body in this reality. It's from one perspective. That's not true, but it is true, right? You can't necessarily get on a roller coaster unless you're a certain height. So it's kind of the same thing. Therefore, how can you have that experience on that roller coaster until you can only imagine what that would be like until you actually experience it? And my guidance team was basically saying there were certain things I couldn't display, and many of us couldn't, because people wouldn't understand it. It's like, I'm not comparing myself to Plato by any means, but can you imagine knowing this information, but being unable to express it because the medium that you have to work with isn't expressible because of the vibratory frequency that was held, right? Yet he still expressed it, and we still have all of this knowledge. But who's to say how long it took for all of that to actually unfold? So essentially that space of understanding, there were waves, and those patterns did not reflect what it was that we were accessing. So what I was being shown is, as a collective, we were all operating within a certain frequency. Certain people could break through and pull in this information and share it, but not everybody could because of the density or the inability to make that jump. And again, this leads back to what I previously wrote about, which from my perspective, we had to take steps. It couldn't just be done in all one moment because the adjustment would be too much. It's like equalizing, you know, when you're scuba diving, if you go up too fast, you end up sick. So you have to make the appropriate adjustments. And I was also shown, and again, apologies if I'm repeating this, but if you have a group of scuba divers, some have more experience than others. Some might have a fear about water or sharks. Some people might have allergies or asthma, and they might have to adjust slower going up than others. Others might have to adjust slower going down, right? So every person and their experience and how they're adjusting to these frequencies is unique. Yet also there was a lot of outside influence about the egg that we were being held within, that only offered a certain medium or bandwidth of frequency that we were able to operate from or hold for an extended period of time, so to speak. So it didn't, some of us were accessing more, but what we were able to work with didn't reflect that. So we had to find our own way to express this, and mine was through writing. It would be as if the higher realms and the higher learning and the higher senses all needed to calibrate. And what it says is could not calibrate in a particular linearization bandwidth that existence was centered in before. So where I was, let's say a year ago, according to that linear map, pin in time, we were in a different place in space. Excuse me. And that also has to do, when I say particular linearization bandwidth, it's particle linearization bandwidth. A particle and a wave are one and the same. They're not separate from each other, but how we view them is different at different times. So it was almost like the wave wasn't completely long enough to reach out and connect with these other bandwidths. So it kept getting interrupted, is basically what I was shown by these time loops, habit patterns, right? But now the existence has shifted. The existential existence, play on words. The awareness of oneself, higher self, has expanded, and the awareness is not necessarily knowledge. It is a knowing from within that then accesses the knowledge. So as we know thyself and become more aware of our existential existence, that we are beyond what we thought we might have been before, even where we're located in space, as all of this shifts and changes together, we're not necessarily going to be told this. We feel it. It's a gut feeling. We just know things are different. I always think of Game of Thrones. What is Tyrion Lannister? Is that his name? I can't remember now, but he says, I drink and I know things. Like some of these things and the information that Plato received his information from, right? He got it from beyond what was necessarily taught to him, or he had a basic knowledge, a knowingness come in, a teaching that he then learned or was made aware of. And then he, because of his own knowingness, braided those concepts together, yoked them together, and connected into more, right? Expanded his awareness. So yes, we are having knowledge come in that tells us about our true ancestry, our DNA, what Earth may or may not, how big Earth may or may not be, right? Different places on the Earth that maybe we didn't know existed. So that's outside of us. But what's happening is our own inner knowingness is what's creating the ability for us to now learn or receive this other knowledge, ironically. From one perspective, this knowledge and information, and this accesses it. So the more we know thyself, the more access we have to bigger knowledge. So the easier it is to access and the easier it is to see into these realms. It can trigger, so this outside knowledge, it works together. So if I hear something that is truth to me, I feel the resonance in those words, and I feel a knowingness in my gut. And I talk about this, the solar plexus, and I want to talk about this. So for just a moment, it's that gut knowing. You listen to someone speak the truth and you feel it inside yourself, your container, and you go, wow, that is, yes, that has a deep essence to it of truth. So the information is knowledge now that they're holding, but then we're accessing that deeper knowledge and they work together. And then we have this poof, right? This aha is what we call it. And we go, wow. And that aha opens up a node, pops a time capsule. It opens up information that was stored inside of this package. And then that jets out, I call it jet stream propulsion, out into the fields, and it makes it more accessible. Now other people have access to it a little bit easier from one perspective. Thoughts have energy. Ahas are thoughts and feelings. If you put the two of those together, the energy is even stronger. And I want to just take a moment and break down the solar plexus region, because this is also a play on words. And I didn't know this, but plexus is actually braiding. So it's actually a braid where we're creating this braiding or coming together, we're weaving in the solar plexus region. So the solar plexus region weaves together a lot of our muscles. It holds our organs, the majority of our organs that are necessary for digestion and movement through the body, right? So it's a very important part of our center. And everything else goes up, down, out from this region, right? Now, this also, though, as this is happening, as of within, so without. So our sun is our solar plexus region within our solar system. Therefore, the sun is also having these, we might call ahas. We might call expansions of itself, right? Everything is in the process of evolving and growing. Our galaxy is getting bigger. We're having this connection with more elements. And as these elements come together, they form more creations, or they create more form, right? So this is a representation of, we're starting to feel that happening in our body. We're having these expansive ahas. It's creating a braid and a connection with our deeper knowingness, and they work together, right, in synchronization. This is happening in the sun. We're seeing it in solar flare activity. We're seeing this energy, these plasma streams jet out from the sun, and they tickle all regions of space, including our physical form. So it has an impact on everything around it. We are also having that impact on everything around us. And so soul, S-O-U-L, and S-O-L, but also where that holds in space. If everything is around the sun, for example, from one perspective, our star, then that is, certain things are being triggered that have a ripple effect throughout our entire solar system. This deeper knowing is expanding and jets out in a propulsion stream of archaeometry, play on words. And this geometry changes the time suit technology. And I kind of wrote, the body is in a time loop, and every so often we are new. So many of us know that every 7 years, our body kind of resets. Our cells are constantly sloughing off and new ones are growing. So essentially, when we have these massive bursts, we're changing everything. So we expand, energy jets out in this propulsion stream, and it propels us farther ahead. It gives us a push that we need into our expansiveness. When I wrote archaeometry, it's an arcing. All right, it's not just archaeometry. So archaeometry is the study of essentially archaeology, right? But it's a play on words. It's a measurement in time. It's our past, right? Archaeology is our history, right? It's a deeper knowing that expands out, and we start to reconnect with our ancient future past. Our archaeometry, we key into the tree of knowledge. We key into and create arcs or patterns of electricity that then spill out and affect everything around us, since we're such electrical beings. We key into higher components of our own archaeology that assists us in creating new building blocks or archaeology of matter, creation, biology, beliefs, thoughts, imagination that then builds our reality from there, literally, which is a holding place in time, right? So now we're in this big shift. All kinds of things are going to start to be built, brought up, remembered, activated. And this adds to our tree. It adds branches. It braids together this past framework that we still have access to, that we're still part of through our memories and our vocabulary and our habit patterns, but we're not looped into a particular archaeometry because our keys have changed. So for example, the keys on the computer are now a different symbiology. So we now recognize the symbols that were hidden before, and we have access to those symbols. And I could keep going on and on and on just about this one paragraph. It's gifting us entry into the bigger tree, the branches, the roots, alcheometry, archaeometry, the chemical creation, our creational field, our own body is chemically changing, just as are the chemicals on the sun, and therefore the chemicals in our solar system. And I could go on. How we're entering into this new world, this new version of reality, is also changing how we show up. This geometry so changes the time suit technology. So it's a play on words. It changes time. It changes the time that we are accessing and how we're accessing things, and our time suit technology. So I kind of brought that up earlier, like with as a child, your skin suit is different than as an adult. But there's so many more layers to this that I haven't even quite unpacked. This has to do, I think, with our DNA, our tree, our branches to our DNA. And essentially, we're growing new branches. We're growing new fibers. We're growing more mycelium because of this knowingness that we are now interacting with. We're interacting as this new knowingness. And my guides were basically saying our body's in a time loop because we're creating time. So our body is existing within a physical linearization, but every so often we go through a complete upgrade. We were in a time loop, I'm continuing to read, that was keeping us stuck in these lower bandwidths, in part because our ski suit technology was not necessarily prepared to make way, was not able to create space and go in that direction to make way. Now, as I was reading this, I kept seeing Milky Way. And so I'm going to add that. This is, again, Living Light Codex. I'm realizing that I was seeing this. I'm seeing ski suit technology, Milky Way. That could take me into so many different. It would have scrambled the wiring because the looping skin loop, and I was seeing Olympic rings and skiing in the Olympics. And I called them rings and bubbles, triad of compression. 3 rings, triangle with 3 rings, and on each end is what I was seeing. So basically what I had been shown, and I can't draw this right now, was a triangle with loops on all 3 ends. So it's like the flower of life, or the creation of life. You start off with 1, then it splits, and then it splits into 3. Most of us know what that looks like. I talked about a strange loop in my last video. I talked about the 3 hairs. So if we look at these shapes, these are triads. It's a 3 of compression. These 3 rings then come together and expand out into one big bubble. They create a new bubble from those 3 rings and from that compression. Whereas before they were unable to come together for whatever reason. We were held within a framework in which those bubbles were there, but they could never quite connect into a bigger pattern. They were just going in this continuous cycle because of where we were in space, because of the matrix or the field that we were collectively held within, from my perspective. So had we have just left that field, because we were so, the word that comes through is habitually coordinated. So we habitually coordinated back into that field because of the limitations that we were taught from one perspective. If we want to look at polarization or us versus them, a group of individuals collectively chose to hold this experience. And so we all held each other accountable from one perspective, if you get the play on words. Like the numbers and the equations and the mathematics were all kept within this particular field of compression. Well, we've now expanded that and we've unlocked it. And we were in a time loop that kept us stuck in lower bandwidths. Ski suit had to do with us riding this water, right? Skiing, where water able to move through it and keep ourselves, what does a ski suit do? It protects us, keeps us warm, right? And when I write about technology, that's something else I want to touch on briefly, because it's really fascinating from my perspective. I talked about this in my last video, but I think it's worth mentioning again. So we have a tendency to think of technology as being outside of us, as being inorganic, as being something that was created to help us, like electronics, you know, as technology. But if you look up the etymology of the word technology, it's actually a discourse or treatise, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, on an art or the arts. Now, systematic treatment of an art, craft, or technique. So it's a system, it's a method of making or doing. But guess what? It also comes from to weave and to fabricate. So it's creating, right? It's weaving, it's fabricating something from an art or a craft. And so our body is a weaving of blood vessels and cartilage and muscles and bones. It is technology, organically created, if we want to call it that, or formed from a medium of sorts that we are now creating from as well. I create this writing, therefore I'm creating from my technology more technology. And so it was not necessarily prepared, our skin suit, what we had on outside of us, to make way, the Milky Way. So this is as within, so without. This is not only our body, but what's going on in the galaxy. I'm actually going to write that briefly and pause just for a moment. So it's also like we've gotten this adjustment, right? So we have more space now in that triad, and triad of compression is actually utilized in cranial sacral therapy as well. And it's talking about how the bones are all compressed. And when you have that, it pushes on the cranial sacral fluid and doesn't allow it to flow properly. And so basically that's what I was shown, is that everything was being compressed for so long because of this control system, we could call it. And now that has been reorganized, is the word that keeps coming up over and over again in the writings that I'm sharing now. And so I'm seeing that we now have enough compression that pushes from the inside out, has to match the pressure coming from the outside in. And I'm not sure exactly how this works, but I think it's almost like displacement, right? When you have water and, you know, it's like it has to match so that it doesn't get crushed. And again, this is a reference to us, where we are in the galaxy, or what's going on with the sun. It's all working in unison so that everything eventually comes to a balanced compression. Now, if I go into compression, it makes me think of spin rate. Now, I know they're not one and the same, but I'm just kind of sharing that to kind of get an idea of what does that look like. So it's not only from the outside in, we have to match that and expand out to match all of these frequencies. And that's essentially what we're doing. And what I had been shown is, I wrote, this looping technology created the ability to withstand higher measures of geometries. So whatever we've done is now allowing us to withstand more compression. Now, compression isn't necessarily a bad thing. Compression is essentially the heart. When we come into a place of, boy, I'm tuning into that with compression, comprehension, right? It's a deeper, it's coherence. Like there's this match that essentially we've lit that is assisting us in stabilizing our frequencies. And I wrote about the scuba diver, which I've already talked about. When you're a scuba diver, you acclimate to going deeper in the compression chamber. So this has to do with our heart as well. And it goes deeper at the same time as expanding out further. So it's almost like I'm seeing us go deeper into space, but we're expanding out from that. And we're in a different area because of that. And this also has to do with our bodies. I have been shown that our DNA is going to look different. I've been shown that we have DNA that's literally jumping ports. It's shifting and changing according to what our body is intelligently directing it to do. So it's rather than a push and a pull, from one perspective, it's compression and expansion. So it's not coming from pushing and pulling from the outside, it's inner to outer. We are being squeezed once again beyond conformity. Beyond that which we would be conforming into, beyond that which we have conformed to in the past. And obviously that's a play on words. We're not conforming to the same story. We're not saying, okay, I fit into that anymore. We're too big for that now. We can't go back to the old womb where that was a version of reality that we were living from within. The old egg has cracked and now we've been birthed into a bigger egg. And of course, that's a play on words with so many different things. What we've agreed to before, we're not agreeing to now. We're not conforming. For in this new birthing canal, a new birthing canal is born. This canal holds a charge. This canal holds a new time structure, if you will, only meant to measure our own self-worth, the net value per se. And I'm writing purse, per se, PSI. And so what we hold within us is our net value, our net worth. And as we expand, we break the bank, so to speak. So I'm going to take and just break this down a little bit, break the bank. Many of us know what else this is referencing, right? Nothing can form, nothing can hold the same vibration. So everything from our old reality that we're taking with us because we're still connected to it, but we're changing it. So it can no longer look the same as it once did. And so we're going to play briefly, I say the net value. So net value is the resultant amount after accounting for the sum or difference of two or more variables. It is frequently in economics used to imply the remaining value after accounting for a specific commonly understood deduction. So we could go into all of that just by itself. But essentially, we have more variables. We have a bigger difference now. Now we have to add that all together. And it's the total of all of that after getting rid of the old stuff. So from my perspective, once we get rid of the old stuff, we have more space, right? Our value goes up because we don't have all of this old attachment that we no longer match our frequency with. But that's just one version of what this means. So this canal is literally where we are in space. So it holds a charge as well. The matter or the medium with which we're creating from in the universe, which we're being created through and birthed from in this canal, think of it as a wormhole, right? It holds a charge, and that charge holds a new time structure. And I believe Dan Winter says, and I always quote him, I don't quote him per se because I don't want to get it wrong, but it's the spin ratio, the ratio or the rate, excuse me. I believe he says time is just the rate of spin. And apologies if I didn't get that right, but essentially it's how quickly, or that's not even the right definition, but maybe we'll go into that at a different time where you can go look up his videos on time. But that would make sense because now how we access things is different, how we're growing is different. So the structure in which we create our reality and that spin is different, holds a completely different charge than it did before. And I wrote that that's meant to measure our own self-worth. Well, if our own knowledge of self has become bigger, therefore the measurements on how we measure that, which includes our reality, has to change. This also has to do with when I wrote the net value per se, the purse. Now, there were purses that were drawn and shared in a lot of the old ancient structures in archaeometry, archaeology were found holding purses. And my understanding is they may have been a representation of a battery. And that would make sense because it has to do with charge and technology. And I mean, this is just my own perspective. I could be wrong, but that's what I've kind of gotten out of that from what I've listened to somebody else talk about. But it kind of ties in with what it is that I'm sharing here. And if I play with this, I'll just share screen briefly. This creates a new time structure. It's only meant to measure our self-worth, the net value per se. So if I go into PSI, pounds per square inch is a measurement of pressure in the imperial system of measurement. It's commonly used to measure the pressure of gases or liquids. And I think this is so symbolic because if we've expanded, everything has expanded. So we have to change our measurements to fit that accordingly, which includes how we measure time. Everything is connected. As we expand, we break the bank. So we break the old purse, the thing that we use to hold our value now is broken, and we have to reshape it essentially because our worth, right, has also changed. And I'm going to pause for just a moment on that. And basically, worth, if we go into that, has to do with the equivalent in value to the sum or item specified. Oh boy. So if I go into that, this new canal, the birthing canal that we're in of the universe, holds a new time structure. It measures, so it's got a length, it's got a value system based on our own self-worth. So we're creating this, the net value per se, and that's after we take away from, right? This is the total that we're left with, I think, if I'm understanding this correctly. And the amount of pressure. So again, I mentioned that we're essentially imploding. I don't know if I said that, but we're creating compression from the inside out, inside of us. As we expand, we break the bank. And so if I look at this, the bank, well, it says it's related to bench, the senses set of things in rows, and tiers or oars. So basically, the bank, financial institution, obviously, but it's a table. So it's an exchange table. Now, when I see, for me, exchange tables is like the periodic table, how we measure things. We could go into many different, so natural earth and incline bordering a body of water. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a financial institution. A slope, a sandbank. When I see that, I see what things were held within. I see an hourglass, I see sand, and I see time. It's an ink borders a body of water. There's so much. To rise, the rise in banks, to form a bank or slope or a rise. So essentially we break that and we're regrouping based on our own value system. So our outer value system, how we measure finances, how we measure what's important, how we do the math, also has to change to match the pressure that we are making from the inside out. This chamber is connecting us to a vast region of deeper self-worth, which I also see as abundance, bringing into our awareness a deeper region of space, regional matrix, that has been birthed long ago, yet is now being accessed, for we have changed our channels. That which we have spoken about in the past is available and aware, a self-organizing reunion a flare, if you will, a spark in the dark, solar plexus. Yet there is much more that we are alluding to here. So let me just pause and come back to this. So this is a literal place in space from what my understanding is. It also has to do, I really feel that there's something unexplored in our heart and our brain that has been here the whole time, but science has never seen it, or they've seen it and ignored it because they didn't know what to do with it. So I'm seeing that there's new regions of our body that are being discovered because we broke the bank. The pattern that it was held within has now opened. So we can see through that other layer, or we can see through that table that wasn't there before. And whenever I think of table, I also think of multiplication. So this chamber is connecting us to a vast region of deeper self-worth. It's the heart chamber, the compression chamber. It activates it and we feel more expansive and we feel more valuable. We feel more abundant. But this also has to do with the matrix of reality that we exist within. All of a sudden, we become aware of our higher self, of a deeper place of who we really are. It's a regional matrix. So regional is a place in space, and it's a pattern that we're held within. All of a sudden, we realize we're part of something bigger. But I also see this happening like with our telescopes and with our science exploration, that basically we're discovering something that was birthed long ago. So this new region has always been here. We're just now coming into it. And now we're able to access it. Now, when I want to go back to, it was birthed long ago, but that doesn't mean that it was now the same that it was when it was birthed. So we're coming into this place that was birthed long ago that's ancient, yet it has also evolved if we want to look at things as a matrix and a region in time from one perspective. Because we have changed our channels. We're changing what we're tuning into. Channels also have to do with not only what we're tuning into, but our direction, the channel that we're taking, right? The channel markers on a body of water, where our location is, the channels, the canals that we're moving are also, they've changed. That which we have spoken, so the spokes on a wheel before could also be seen as channels, each of those spokes. And also what we have said about in the past, what we've spoken about, so what we've tuned into and turned from, we've talked about it, now it's available and it's aware. So we've talked about this void. We've talked about this existential part of creation, source energy, or maybe we've talked about angels. Maybe we've talked about these deeper places and spaces. It's available to us now, and it is aware of us. So we're creating this exchange, and now we are aware of each other from a different perspective. A self-organizing reunion, a flare, if you will. So if I look at a flare, or we talk about a self-organizing reunion, it's back to neg entropy. It's out of chaos and moving more into order and remembering and self-organizing, because now we're able to fluidly interact with it in a different way. A flare, if you will, a spark in the dark, the solar plexus. So again, it's going back to the sun. We're having these solar flares that are essentially assisting us in the self-organization and the reunion. It activates something within the solar plexus, the fibers in the center of the region of our galaxy, of our body, and as within, so without. We become more aware of our soul connection, not only our bodies, our souls, but also our connection with the sun. Yet there's so much more we are alluding to here. For that which has been illusory or has been alluded to, and I know I spelled that all wrong, I'll have to go back and spell check that, alluded from is now fully accessible. The dreamworks coagulation has birthed its own seam, stream, bandwidth awareness, live birth, bandwidth awareness. So this is so many layers. The easiest layer to say is that which has eluded us before. It always seemed out of reach. It seemed fake. It seemed distant, is now fully accessible. A lot of the things that were illusory, that were actually fake, that were being fed to us as real, are also fully accessible, meaning we now see what is an illusion and what has been, there's so many layers here. So we're seeing through the illusion, we're reaching that which has eluded us before, we're seeing through the illusion that led to eluding, the truth eluding, being eluded from us. So many different plays on words. The dreamworks, coagulation has birthed its own seam stream. So we are essentially dreaming with our ancestors. We're reconnecting the song lines. Ooh, I've got goosebumps. We're remembering that which we have access to, that we've always had access to, is now remembering us, because we've now reached out and connected these song lines, dream lines, plexus of interchangeable fibers of reality. And we're banding with the awareness. So we're tuning into the symphony, making the appropriate adjustments, and it's tuning into us. And essentially it's a live birth. We're watching this in real time. We're creating this in real time. Therefore, we are birthing life now. Yet there's still always a lag time in time to catch up to this region. And that's confusing. Not that any of this isn't, but essentially because of our relationship with time, then there's still some of this that's catching up to us, even though it's all happening now. So we may feel a lag time about this, and this has already been created, but we're still catching up to it a little bit, if that makes sense. So even though I just said we're in it, it's real, it's happening, there's still a little bit of a lag time because of time. Yet again, we are being invited to really stay in a place of inner awareness. For as we continue to birth these bandwidths from within, again, this has to do with DNA, frequency, vibration, imagination into reality, we are streaming real time. So this was kind of like, look, if we stay in a place of inner awareness and we're still continuing to birth, but we're now aware of what we're bringing to the table. Now we're more aware of what our value is becoming, was, already has been, and we're bringing all of that to the table, which means we're going to need a bigger table. We're going to need a bigger multiplication system. It's an addition to, and so, which is 3. And so for as we continue to birth these bandwidths from within, we are streaming real time. Play on words. So how time works, we're streaming that. It's instant creation. Those that are responsible for their own assertiveness, and that I wrote was a play on words, so we're going to look at that briefly. So if I look at assertiveness, those that are responsible for their own assertiveness, assertive action, the timekeepers, if you will, those that have kept us in real time, not false time, are communicating with these access points on such a high bandwidth, they are helping to balance the chain, if you will. And you might be one of those people. You become one of those people when you are asserting your own value. And assertiveness has been redirected, is what I'm being shown. People think assertiveness means one thing, but it actually, what they're saying is we are responsible for our own assertiveness, how we assert ourselves in the world, how we show up. When we're working in real time, we're being present in the now moment. We're out creating this idea of what time is and how we should be working and interacting with it, because we're changing it in real time. So if I just pause for a moment and share screen here, I'm almost done here. Assertive etymology. Declare, vindicate, maintain, or defend by words or measures. Now we're going to break this down for a minute. To lay claim to, appropriate, stand up for one's rights or authority. I love the word assert. So if, it means pertaining to assertion. So we're essentially looking at lining up to join together to put in a row. Now, interestingly enough, that's the play on words, because earlier I had said the tables, a bank is a row of. We're lining up things in a row. We create a table that's in a row or columns that we then assign value to, and we hold that value inside of that table. So those of us that are responsible for our own assertiveness, our own ability to line up, our own ability to put together, to join together, not only with ourselves, but with our fellow humans and other beings, we then stand up for each other. In essence, we're not doing it. I don't really like the word defend by words or measures, but I do like the fact that it says you're using words or measures. So we're using action and we're using measurements, right? To see how big something is or how long something is. We are then taking this action and we're creating in real time. So it's out creating these old games that are no longer able to keep up with us because we're creating it now. Whew. And I know that has a lot more layers that I'm not even necessarily tapping into right now. So basically, we're doing this with these access points on such a high bandwidth, they're helping us to balance the chain. Now, chain for me also comes back to the body and the DNA chain and the chain of communication, the chain of command. So we're balancing this all out in real time. Those that are not doing this in the same way are actually behind. They're not able to keep up. So that's how this works. And I put the chain of commands are changing times. They are changing. This creates an assertive documentary, play on words, that tells a story in real time. As it tells a story in real time, the bandwidths that are unifying are allowing for a stabilization in the higher matrix grids, portals, players, beaches, playas. And this allows for multiple players to set their course. So I'll just kind of share screen here. So this creates an assertive documentary. So when you watch a documentary, it's telling a story, and it's a real story about something that has already happened. So you guys are that. So basically, we're creating the future. So we are standing up for, we are creating a lineup, an assertion. We are creating an assertive story, telling it in real time. So as it tells the story in real time, this allows the bandwidths to stabilize the higher grids. So we're already creating the future. We're lining up with the future. We're lining up with the story that's already been created by us or that's already been created by our ancestors in the future. And we're reaching out, branching out, but we're not creating from them. We're creating from who we are now. Therefore, we're changing the future. Woo! And the matrix grids are what we create our future from. It's just like the ones and the zeros. We can't see the mathematics that hold or the geometry that hold our reality together. But we can go back to Plato and the Platonic solids and the star mother that like Dan Winter talks about. The Platonic solids all being nested within each other created configuration of our fractal of our reality. So this allows for stabilizations, the portals, the players, the beaches. Now, when I said that, I recognize it's water and sand, right? So again, it's the bank that we recognize the beaches, sands of time. How is a beach created? Well, a beach is created from the breakdown of all of the organisms, right, that then create the sand. So we're breaking things down, which creates more beach, which creates a bigger space or a bigger field to operate within. And it's sand, which also has to do with time. This is, in effect, changing and stabilizing who are the players. And again, that's a reference to playa, like playing the game right, in the right way. And also stabilizes the portals so that we don't have these off alignments, misalignments anymore. This allows for multiple players to set their course. So many of us are working together to play together to set this course up. It's not just one way things are done. And that's another for future. And that was it for just this video. Let me just pause for a moment. I just decided to keep going. If you've made it this far, I mean, you can always pause and then continue if you need a break. So I don't have much more to go here. But essentially what I was shown is, okay, so we'll just keep going. And I'm going to share screen. We know that this message seems too expansive beyond words. Again, don't mind my spelling, you guys. I haven't checked this at all. For it is accessing so much that can only be expressed with a certain stream of Play-Doh, if you will. And that was a reference to my earlier reference to Play-Doh. So we can only access it if we have all of the colors. For you must play in your own ability to express from a co-creative documentary. For you are telling a story in your own frequency, and your frequency is blending together with multiple bandwidths to access different frequencies in which you spill together. I am seeing this whole network of timekeepers that are essentially out of the entrapment of false time, and they are really creating. Those that are holding their composure, their compositary, I don't think that's spelled right, composition, composers, are creating at such a high speed, a high rate of velocity, that it is out-creating, it is outweighing those that are of the old system. It is so vast and such an exponential rate of speed that they don't even know that they have been out and out created. I am seeing a bubble and a ring after ring of bubbles of the flower of life. So essentially what I was shown is that, well, that's pretty self-explanatory. They don't realize it, or they're not able to see past their own rings of creation. And we're already out here, and they don't realize that we've already created all of this because they're still stuck in their own bubble rings. And I think of dolphins when they blow rings, and then they kind of blow rings to confuse the fish and to help herd them in a particular direction. Those bubbles kind of hold space so that you can't move through it as easily. And that's essentially what was created before in the old energy. But now we're creating at such a high speed that that other speed is now behind the times, so to speak. And again, I could add more, but we won't. We'll just kind of, okay. Within each of these bubbles holds expression and higher awareness and location. And I would venture to say higher awareness location. Before, it was so dense, it wasn't able to sustain itself. You would get a ring and it would go back to sleep, so to speak. You would get a ring of creation, then it would move back down because it could not be sustained. And I was just shown, again, all these bubbles, all these versions of reality. Think of the Olympic rings, and it was this looping thing. It would try to get momentum, and then it would just go back down into the first loop. And it was kind of a constant space. So within each of these new bubbles that we are creating as light workers and humans that are in this real-time expression, that bubble is a moment. It's a now moment, and it holds not only a higher awareness inside of it, but that is then a location, a ping, a pin on a map. Because in this moment, as I'm expressing this to you, I am creating in real time in this reality a memory in all records. If you want to look at it as whatever label we want to give it, I am creating this in this reality. And now, because of this location and awareness of my location of what I'm tapping into, not physically, it gives me a point of reference. And I'm being called to go back to Plato. When Plato would get his information, he would maybe perhaps see it like a map. And he could always go back to that pin on the map and continue to gain information or glean knowledge from that place on the map, that location. And I'm being called to go into that a little bit more. So if you look at the location on a map and you pin it, let's say it's your favorite place that you've stayed at. Let's say it's your favorite hotel. Well, you don't just have that hotel as a memory of your map. You have the landmarks that are around it. You have the memories that are associated with it. You have the physical feelings that are associated with it. You have the that building also had other people that were there at the time. That building held remnants of a decoration from the past. I mean, I could go on and on. It's infinite. It's fractal, depending on what we allow ourselves to remember. And I said that a ring would be created, but then it wasn't sustainable. So it would almost be like fibers that were built to branch out, but then they never necessarily connected to anything. So the fibers were always there, but they were kind of shut off. And now all those synapses are firing again. And now they're branching out, and we're giving them permission to connect with a deeper location. And this could be physical or literal too. The people that have those ahas and then they don't sustain it, so they go back to sleep. They forget, right? It's like Sleeping Beauty. So we have this massive awakening, and then because we're not in the habit, or we don't give that awakening enough sustainable energy to complete the manifestation of it or to complete the growth of it, we shut that down and go back into these old habit patterns that feel safe. They feel like we remember, okay, I don't know how to grow spiritually, but I do know how to, play this video game over here and drink alcohol because that's what I'm used to. I'm just using that as an example. For all that has been corrupt, the corruption has corrupted itself, like acid or rust. So the reason I'm pointing this, it eats away at the foundation, or core and the foundation. It eats away at itself and does not have anything to jump onto, so to speak, to feed onto. So when I wrote this, just this one paragraph, acid and rust are actually a chemical, I didn't look it up, but from my understanding is it's actually corrosion is a chemical process. So it has to have elements, and the combination of those elements are what creates the corrosion or the rust. And so this corrupt is what I was seeing literally is a chemical change that literally is eating itself because it's not sustainable, the old system. And because of that, once that chemical combination begins, it actually eats away at what it was built on in the first place. And it doesn't have anything to jump onto. So this is a reference to, we could say, spirits or ghosts or beings and entities that are perhaps, we'll go that route just for a second. They wanted to jump onto people, but they can't jump onto people because the vibration of the frequency isn't sustainable for them to hang on. We're going too fast for them, and they were much more dense and slow. And I'm not saying this from hierarchy, us better than them, just a different frequency. And so rather than us holding all of their stuff and our stuff too, we're vibrating it off, and it's allowing them to move into a different place in space where they might be supported. And that's a whole other video. Also jump. Whenever I write jump, it's jumping genes, jumping genetics. So, and I don't quite understand this yet, but essentially we have certain jumping genes that will jump onto something and they can cause dis-ease, or they can create good things depending on what our body requires. So if we have a lot of things going on in our body, let's say that are needing to be cleansed, from one perspective, the genetics are going to adapt intelligently to that. And therefore the jumping genes might create a corrosion, not really recognizing, boy, there's so many different levels we could go there, but I'm just going to leave it at that. So now our jumping genes are going to jump, and they're going to land and have something to hold on to that are matching our expansion rather than matching this looping system that we were stuck into a closed feeding system. So it's actually, well, we'll come back to that another time. Okay. It has out-corrupted itself. It is corrosive. It is a reflection terminology, terminal velocity, terminal as in it can't sustain itself. Warp speed is warped speed. War speed is warped. And I wrote, so something was going on about the subject, light, speed, and sound. It ate itself. It has run out of time. The time system in which it was created, the deeper aspect or darker aspect has outrun itself, run itself into the ground. Now, I don't understand all of this. I do understand, I write about technology. So from one perspective, I see that they're referencing, my guidance system is referencing technology. There was a certain technology that was created, and maybe it had something to do with warp speed. It had something to do with the speed of light. I wrote light, speed, sound. So it has something to do with technology. It ate itself. So it's almost like when you get a black hole or some type of massive energy that just inverts on itself, and it can't create from there anymore. So this terminal, which also has to do with the channel, it's a reflection terminology. So it's a reflection of what was terminal. It has an end. It is not infinite. It's in a place of finite. So it saw itself basically, and now it sees that it's corrupted from the inside out. And there's so many different ways. I'm sure there's technology that I don't know that's been created that now. And it also had to do, it says the time system in which it was created in. So because we've changed our relationship with time and the dynamics, the fluid dynamics of time, the ripple that goes out because of what we're creating now, the stuff that was created in an old time frame are no longer supported within that frame, because that frame had to be sustainable or hold a certain corruption pattern to be coded into for us to stay there, and it doesn't work anymore. So even that is crumbling, and so it's trying to outrun itself. Like when you look in the mirror over and over again and you're trying not to be what you're seeing, but there is no out because it's literally inverted itself into the ground, and that has something to do with technology. I am seeing this as a reference to underground wiring. This terminal velocity cannot recompose itself, and that has to do with sound and light. Its composure has run out, so to speak. So the ability for it to be a cohesive isn't working. It's out of time. Time does not exist in the same way that it used to. Therefore, we cannot conform to the same rules that were created on a particular or that particular linear frequency or bandwidth. And then my guidance team goes on to say this will create some animosity, so to speak, the animal velocity from within in survival mode. So because there are those that are also out of time, their chemical components are eating away at themselves, so to speak. And this causes them to self-distrust. So that's obviously a play on words, self-destruct and not trust themselves and not trust anyone really. And in this process of self-destruction, there will be a flurry of retribution. So I'm going to pause for a moment. I know I went a little dark here, but it's not. It's just cause and effect. So as this happens, people are feeling what's happening. I'm imploding, not in a good way. I'm breaking down. And so from one perspective, this is going to create animosity. It's the animal velocity from within. It's basically people go into survival mode. They shut down. They don't trust themselves. They don't trust others. And the more that happens, the more they corrode from the inside out. It's rust, it's acid. Unless you clean that out, it eats away at your ability to then create, or better spoken, it puts you back on the wheel and creates a self-destructive pattern that is then leading to that particular reality of self-destruction. And there will be a flurry of retribution. I see people wanting to reach out and blame someone, blame others for what they had put their trust in, blame others for, and I see this like being a victim. It's not my fault, it's your fault. Consequences for the actions, consequential sequence of events. So in this process of self-destruction, there will be a flurry of retribution, consequences for the actions, consequential sequence of events that are going to weigh out the pros and the cons. And this essentially will create a dissolution of the veil, a dissolution of the fabric of that which was created for this particular reality construct that is in the process of fading away, like the band, the dying orchestra on the Titanic. And I'll just pause for a moment. So this is pretty self-explanatory. These are what we're starting to see. This person can't trust that person. Who do we trust? You have to trust yourself. The consequences for the actions, we kind of know. The consequential sequence of events. So because of those actions, there's also now a sequence of events that also have to happen. And when I say sequence, I think of sequins, like lights, reflections, right? Sparkles that are going to weigh out, not outweigh, but weigh out. So this gives a way out. They're going to weigh out, like bow out, right? And it's going to be heavy. So it's got to be weighed out like the balancing on a scale. So you have to weigh it to measure the pros and the cons of these consequences. And because we have to see it measured, we have to see it weighing, it's going to weigh on us. That is what will create the dissolution of the veil. A dissolution of the fabric, our reality, right? The stage, that which was created for this particular reality construct that is in the process of fading away like the band on the Titanic, right? So it's like that last song. This construct or deconstruct, so this deconstruction creates a mass decay. So I'll go back to sharing screen just for a moment. I am seeing not like a mass extinction, but the mass decay brings up fossil fuels. So false fuels, false fuel technology, false ill fuels. And this deeper technology that has been hidden from one particular reality, if you will reveal itself to be vast and infinite. I am seeing anger. People will be mad that this was hidden. Now, you guys, I want to just say for a moment, if I look at this, I have written a lot of things about predictions, and I don't always share them. And part of the reason is what I'm writing about is what I'm tapping into based on what I have access to. this can always change. Probabilities are what I tap into. So if I'm doing a reading for someone, I'm tapping into a probability. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to happen in this way. But essentially what I'm sharing here in a nutshell is that, and I'm going to play with this a little bit, because I don't really know exactly what this is going to look like. So the easiest way of looking like this is we're hearing the dying orchestra, our construct is falling apart, but what happens is as there's an extinction of something, it's a mass decay. So as this stuff starts to rot, it also creates a chemical, like rust is actually a decay of one chemical merging with another and creating another chemical, which then eats away at it. So we're going to see and feel this decay from what I'm being shown. It can bring up fossil fuels. So it's bringing up remnants of our past that have been used to fuel our reality that were false. That's one version of what I'm writing about. I'm just sharing one more time. So as we take it apart, we see what was hidden in the middle, and it gives off like a gas. It gives off this stink. But also it's going to show false fuel technology, false ill fuels, things that were not used properly, things that were not used for the betterment of mankind, things that were more about power. Will we all see this? I don't know. Will there be some people that know about this, that are maybe on secret missions or that are involved in things that aren't shown to the everyday public? Most likely, but who knows? It could be exposed to all of us. This deeper technology that has been hidden from one particular reality, if you will. So when I say that one particular reality, it's been hidden from perhaps our reality, but that's just one part, not all reality. So there is a part of reality that knew about this going on. There's a group of people that already knew, because in their reality, they had access to this knowledge. They were part of it. So this deeper technology that has been hidden from our particular reality will reveal itself to be vast and infinite. So I'm being shown that we have this fuel source also on a sidebar, on a positive note, that's an infinite amount of fuel that we have had access to that has been hidden from us. So that's all a play on words. And it will be infinite. So we'll have access, and we're going to be like, we had access, we had to suffer this whole time. So people will be angry. And this is part of us processing and integrating our emotions for us to be able to hold on to these, the goodness, so that we can outcreate from those who are angry. And you guys, anger at some of the things we're learning about is a human emotion. So I'm being really called for those that are angry at what we're witnessing, those that are angry about having this technology hidden from us. That is a human response, and we wouldn't be human if we didn't feel that. But do we use those feelings? What feelings are we using for fuel? And in essence, anger can be utilized for good if we choose to transmute that anger into usable energy for a greater purpose that is in alignment with compassion and love. So I'm being shown that this will be revealed, and it will be vast and infinite. It is a reptilian type of consciousness that is not able to exist within this bandwidth. I am seeing that this creation, I'm seeing this creation on, we'll have to come back to that. And the beings that are neutral, love all, did not want to see this mass extinction, which is, by the way, multidimensional, not just about a species. They did not want to see anyone being hurt. So this is where sometimes I'm shown things that I don't fully understand. And I'm really being called to share this with you guys, because there are a lot of us who are awakening to our gifts and are being shown things that we may not fully understand. It's really important that my guides keep saying, look at this from a broader perspective. For example, when I was downloaded with this message, I was kind of I was a little bit like, oh no, a mass extinction? People are gonna die? What does this mean? And I got into, it's important not to be in a place of fear. And my guides continue to say, this is a multidimensional. This isn't about a species being annihilated. This is a multidimensional message. And so basically, there were beings that didn't want any of this to happen, but it did, right? And you might be one of those beings. You know, most of us are love and light. We don't want this to happen, but it did. It's not about a species. Okay, so basically I'm being shown that those that are of this lower consciousness, we all have reptilian brain, right? We talk about that, the reptilian aspect of our brain, the lizard brain, the bird brain. We are all a hybrid, many of us are hybridizations of a mix of all kinds of species. But those of us that are polarized into only being service to self in the sense of at the detriment of others, cause and effect, or in a place of survival mode where they're only existing in those lower chakras or energy centers, for example, are not able to exist within this bandwidth. So what that told me is they are able to exist within other bandwidths though. And if everything is infinite, therefore they will be going into a different bandwidth, and we may not be able to see the bandwidth that they're in, just as they may not be able to see the bandwidth that we're in, because we cannot exist together, if that makes sense. That doesn't mean that anybody's going to be annihilated from one perspective. And I'm sharing this is important because there's still an element of people that want to see an eye for an eye, but we're not necessarily recognizing that that is being essential, that's happening. We just may not be able, it's cause and effect. So we're not necessarily seeing it because we're already in a higher bandwidth. And that's, again, I could go into so many different layers. Okay. Almost done. This goes back to the bandwidth earlier that was not allowed to cross streams, as it was going to cause wires to fry, an overload or stimulus of information and energy, electricity that would fry the mainframe, so to speak. There was a delicate balance that needed to be created. There were beings given the opportunity to bow out, so to speak. And this is necessary because they cannot withstand the energy that we are in the process of harnessing, harvesting, and creating. They can't harvest the energy anymore because it is too much. So this is a multidimensional message. There was the idea that in the old reality, the old matrix, our energy was being harvested. Because our energy is so high from one perspective now, it cannot be harvested in the same way. So for example, this reptilian consciousness harvested pain. And by the way, this is one linearization of how it worked. It's not the end all, know all, be all answer. But just to get an idea, let's say that these reptilian consciousness were harvesting our energy because they needed it in order to thrive. They needed a particular environment in which to live in, and they resonated even though they might have been highly psychic. That doesn't mean they were in their heart. So when you're not in your heart and you're living in a survival mode, but only using your intuition through a hive mind or outside sources, and you're not running it through the heart, your frequency isn't, well, your frequency might be higher than some, but it isn't in resonance with what it is that we are creating in a higher frequency human domain, if that makes sense. So because we are not giving them pain and suffering the same way, that it's not as resonant with us anymore. We're not experiencing it in the same way that we once were. Therefore, they're not able to harness it in the same way that they once were. In addition to that, the technology that they were using in order to harness that energy is no longer available to them because it's not operational from one perspective. Okay. But because there were those of us that don't want to see, by the way, the reptilian, not all reptilians are bad or negatively polarized. We are only being told one side of the story. We all have a little bit of everything inside of us. So essentially, there are those that could not vibrate where we are now, and they were given the opportunity to leave or to exist within the other bandwidth. Others were given the opportunity to step up. And because of that, there will be some beings who are choosing to raise their awareness, raise their frequency, be in a place of love that never would have before. And ultimately, we're being called as humanity not to worry about, like, they might be doing it just so they survive. But in that process of making that choice, and I talked about this in my last video at the beginning of this writing, the fork in the road. Their choice to operate at a higher bandwidth automatically gives them the opportunity to see things from that higher bandwidth perspective, which means they now can choose to play in the higher frequency field. They don't have to play in that lower field anymore if they don't want to, because we have the choice here on Earth. Some made this choice unconsciously because they were so well, it was still a choice. So anyways, so that's a beautiful gift in actuality, that they had the choice to not be in this bandwidth. So they don't fry out. They can continue to create whatever they are in that field of creating. And we're not going to play in that field anymore. We're not adding to that. They'll have to be on their own. We refer back to the essence of the elements, the elemental vocabulary that is creating within it. Oh, excuse me, is creating within it a whole new space-time collaboration. We create within this reality a landscape of technology, and this holds within it many possibilities. We end on this note. I was seeing the note having to do with value system, monetary notes and vibration, musical notes and writing. Where do we think this word originated from? The root of the word, so to speak. Musical notes and money notes are a value currency, and the value currently that was once activated within this portal, within this range of chemistry sets, play on words, a region of creative matrix placement. This value system is archaic and cannot hold with the new revelations, relegations, regulations, elevations, and revealing. The revealing are, so multiple, going to elevate a certain way of living, a certain reality system, a certain tribunal will be taking place, play on words, and we must save face. There will be people that want to save face, and they will want to create a new face to be behind, to smile behind. Yet this will have to be the truth of who they are. We end on this note: the chords that you pluck, the chords that you choose to play, music, rhythm, scale, and vibration at the core of your it's real activity and relay activity, so to speak. That which you relate to one another, so I'll play with that, relay back and forth, are creating in instant real time. So recognize this: the more you return to innocence, to time bender reality, the more you return to home base. And that which was created in these false grid patterns cannot affect you, period. So it's funny because my friend Jess is doing a whole thing on return to innocence. I wrote this back in January. She's doing this workshop in Sedona. So I'll have to share that link. And it really does come down to us being and connecting with our inner child and coming back to a place of creating from innocence, creating from that space of just pure love and that pure sense of creating just to create, feeling in the moment, in compassion with everyone else. It's like, oh, maybe that person would be fun to play with. Oh, I'd love to try this. And staying away from these habit pockets, these patterns of consistent anger or lower frequency. Again, it's okay to play there once in a while because we're human, we feel them. But the less we're in those self-destructive, corruptive patterns, the less we feed that old frequency. And the faster we outcreate it from one perspective. And I put that we create in instant real time, the time benders. We're the ones that then bend time. We bend the rules according to our now time, right? Rather than getting stuck in someone else's rules based on an old creation of how time used to work. I also put here a certain tribunal, revelations, elevations, regulations. I'm going to pause just for a moment on that. I'm just going to share screen. So I'm being called to talk about this tribunal for a moment because oftentimes people will get messages from their guides. They'll get messages from the universe, and they will then attach them to a meaning in this dimension. So we could say that from a lower perspective, a tribunal sounds scary. It sounds like someone's going to be judged for their actions. And I already know that there's a large group of people who are believing that there's going to be these tribunals and they're going to happen in a certain way and they're going to look a certain way. And this is going to be the end result. And that's the messages and the downloads that they're tuning into. And from one perspective, in a particular reality, that may be true. But being that we're creating in real time, it may not actually turn out looking like that, because we might have decided in this next 6 months, for example, as a collective, as we create collectively together, that that's not how we want to see things play out. I'm just sharing. That's what I see reality as. It's shifting. So again, not being landlocked into a particular idea of what that means. We can also recognize that there are galactic tribunals that are happening that we may not ever hear about. There may be, so tribunal essentially, I'm just going to share screen briefly, is responsible for having a fair and timely process to resolve human rights. So it's the process for helping the parties to solve the complaint themselves. So it's looking at both sides. So it may not be this idea that essentially this tribunal is going to be held and all of us are going to witness it, although it could play out that way. So I just really wanted to kind of look at that. Where did I go? Sorry, I'm seeing the note. Oh, so again, reference to the monetary system. Think about the technology. There's lots of notes. We're ending that on that note. So that note, that value, that money, that song that went into that value system is ending. Musical notes and money notes are a value currency. So the value currently that was once activated within this portal. So that's a total play on words about time within this range of chemistry sets. So again, back to chemistry sets. The corruption is going quickly. It's creating a chemistry, which then sets up or lines us up for the next value system and our own value. A region of creative matrix placement. That's a play on words too. This value system is archaic. This goes back to archaeometry, right? Archaeometry is the study of archaeology, but I also see that as a measurement. It's old. It cannot hold with the new revelations, regulations, relegations, elevation that it is revealing. So when I say it's going to elevate a certain way of living, leading by example. All of a sudden, we're going to start seeing, from my perspective, the value of somebody who upholds their agreement, who operates from their truth, not because they're landlocked in this power play. So it said we must save face, but that's a play on words too. Like, we're saving who we are, but also that's been what's the right word? Taken. Like, save face meaning there's going to be people who want to hide behind it. They want to save who they have appeared to be, right? But they're going to create smile behind someone else. But this is going to have to be the truth of who they really are. So we might see that person might be smiling on the outside, but really we see what they're really like. Yeah, and so this has to do with the more you return to innocence, the more you return to home base, the truth of who we really are, the true essence. Okay, so that's it for now. Whew, I know it was a long one, but thank you so much for tuning in. Oh, and also to end on that note, a reminder, if we're not tuning into that and we're staying in that place, those false grid patterns that are seeking to distort our reality cannot affect us. And I put period, the end. There is this ongoing message that is rippling through some communities that I've witnessed, a little bit of a doom and gloom. It's going to get worse, and it might, but again, it's our perspective that makes it worse, our perspective. So if we keep our perspective as open-minded and open-hearted as possible, some of the stuff that we're starting to see won't affect us as much as it would have if we would have been completely entwined inside of that pattern, unable to see beyond it. It cannot affect you, period. The end of the sentence. So it's like we are being called to stop saying but or what if and just realize, here's where I am. Boom, done. Create from that place as often as possible, right? So in love and light, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Namaste.